In the electromagnetics course, you were taught a lot about transmission lines. There, the frequencies were generally high enough so that the length of the transmission line was comparable to wavelength, etc. At 50 hertz or 60 hertz, that does not apply. The wavelength is extremely large. The length of the transmission line is not comparable to the wavelength in almost all cases that I can imagine. But even then, transmission line has to be looked at very carefully when it comes to power systems. How do you transmit power, three-phase power, from generating station to the substations? What happens to the transmission based on transmission lines design? Okay, so I'll quickly go through a document which is very long. You don't have to try to memorize everything. A lot of things are there for reference. Okay, but you should have an overview of transmission lines as a power system engineer. Definitely, mechanical engineers play a very, very key role in designing, building, and operating transmission lines. And you will see in this document a lot of mechanical aspects also, in addition to the electrical aspects. Definition of a transmission line is it's in front of you. You know this very well. For power systems, the voltage to be transmitted can be very high as 330 kilovolts, but that's very efficient. You can, with the same wires, you can transmit a lot more power if you have higher voltage. Okay. Frequencies, as I said, are very small, 60 hertz or 50 hertz. In our country, it is 50 hertz. From the power systems point of view, the transmission lines are classified as short, medium, or long. As you recall, there are four primary constants in a transmission line: R, L, G, and C. Resistance per unit length, inductance per unit length, capacitance per unit length, and the leakage conductance per unit length. Those factors play an important role in power systems also. If the length is typically 50 kilometer or less, we call it a short transmission line. There is no mathematical proof for all this. These are industry industry-based classifications. Okay, so, and it is not a very hard and fast rule. If it's a 51 kilometer line, maybe you can still call it short. It's okay, nobody will mind. Short transmission lines carry voltage only up to about 20 kilovolt. This is all again based on practice. Because for much higher voltages, you will probably transmit over longer distances. Okay. Take all these numbers with a pinch of salt. Don't take them extremely seriously. They are rough guidelines. Okay. In short transmission lines, capacitance effect is almost negligible. You can ignore it for power system calculations at least. Resistance and inductance do matter even in short lines. They have sizable values that need to be included in calculations. Basically, transmission line loss is a very important parameter to figure out. Yeah. These are the four parameters I have already told you about, and you remember them, I'm sure, from previous courses. Loop resistance measured in ohm per kilometer. These are distributed parameters. They are per kilometer or per meter or whatever. Loop inductance, that is the inductance between the two wires or more than two wires. That's also possible. Many lines have more than two wires also. Line capacitance, that's the capacitance between two wires or among the wires if we have more than two wires. And conductance due to possible leakage between the lines. We will hope that it's not there, but if it's there, it has to be accounted for. For air medium, generally, it's not a big issue. Unless there is a major breakdown of air between the conductors. And then you will see a serious discharge happening from one conductor to another. And believe it or not, that discharge is known as corona. It is called corona discharge. It can happen. It is visible in nights, especially among transmission line conductors. It's dangerous, it's undesirable, but it can happen. But barring that, leakage in conductance probably is not that important for overhead lines. Underground lines, slightly different case. Equivalent circuit for a small length is this. You have seen this in electromagnetics course also. For all practical purposes, this is good for power systems. You don't have to worry about transmission line equations, etc. generally, because length is small enough, relatively speaking, compared to the wavelength involved. So you take the value of R known to you, multiplied by the length of the line, you get the total resistance in the equivalent circuit. You take the value of L given to you or calculated by you. We'll do that soon. And multiplied by the length of the line, you get the total inductance. A straightforward linear calculation. And the parallel circuit consists of the capacitance between the two lines multiplied by delta Z, which is the length of the line, and a series resistance, which is very high in value, and its conductance is G delta Z. If G is 0, conductance will be 0, total conductance will be 0, and this will be an open circuit because resistance will be infinity in that case. Vs will be called as sending end voltage, Vr as the receiving end voltage. Yeah, now let's get back to the classification. Medium transmission lines are typically between 50 kilometer to 150 kilometers. Voltage range is typically 20 kilovolt to 100 kilovolt. In this case, all the four constants are important enough to be included in the calculations. And the last one is the long transmission lines, which are typically those which have a length greater than 150 kilometers. And they are typically used for voltages greater than 100 kilovolt. Here also RL, GC are all going to be included. From power systems point of view, one important parameter is efficiency of transmission. It is the ratio of power received to the power sent. PR divided by PS multiplied by 100 to get the answer in percentage. The closer you are to 100%, the happier you are. As simple as that. Okay, standard notations that power system engineers use for sending and receiving end voltages and currents. All values are typically RMS by default. All voltage and current values. If the power factor at the sending end is cos phi s, and that at the receiving end is cos phi r, then you can write this formula very easily for efficiency of transmission. That's all intuitive anyway. You don't have to prove any of this. We are only worrying about real power here. Complex power is an issue, but for these formulas, only real power is being considered. Voltage regulation is another thing that will come again and again in this course. It is the sending end voltage minus receiving end voltage, only magnitudes, don't worry about phase, divided by receiving end voltage and the entire thing multiplied by 100. Ideally, you should have 0% voltage regulation. That means sending end voltage and receiving end voltages should be the same. It's not possible because of losses in the line. So let's say 5 to 10% value of voltage regulation is generally acceptable. Anything more than 10% will be objectionable. You have to do something about it. If it is bad, then the region probably is that power factors are not high enough, especially at the receiving end, or maybe even at the sending end. So capacitors, etc., have to be employed to improve power factor. We'll come to all that when we talk about generators anyway, But just to let you know that power factor improvement is a major issue in power systems, so that we don't lose power unnecessarily. Now let's look at the primary constants once again. For the most elementary case of two circular solid conductors separated by a distance capital D and having the diameter 2a, the value of L is given by this formula. It is proven in several books. I'm not going to prove it here. Mu divided by pi cos hyperbolic inverse D by 2a. Mu is the permeability of the medium between the conductors. In air, it is 4 pi into 10 to the power minus 7 Henry per meter. Okay. C is given by this formula. This factor cos hyperbolic inverse of D divided by 2a comes in several places. Epsilon prime is the permittivity's real part. So 8.854 into 10 raised to the power minus 12, I think. I have the number later. Farad per meter for air medium. That is the value you will be using. The resistance is given by a formula which is shown as equation 3, Rs by pi a. Rs is surface resistance. I'll show its formula slowly, or maybe soon enough actually. The conductance is given by this formula, equation 4. Here, the imaginary part of permittivity is taken into consideration. If the medium is lossless, then obviously epsilon double prime will be 0. Then G would be 0. Well-known things. Permittivity has a real part and an imaginary part. Imaginary part determines G, real part determines C. This is for the medium between the lines. Yeah, RS formula is here. It is in terms of skin depth. You know what skin depth is for a given material. These are the formulas that you have already been exposed to. So once you calculate delta S, that is skin depth, at a given frequency and for a given material for which electrical conductivity sigma will be known, from there you calculate RS using equation 8. Or you can calculate RS directly also by using equation 5. It's the same thing. In that case, if you use equation 5, you don't need to calculate skin depth. Okay. Now, based on this, let's try to solve some problems which are close enough to real life. Before that, some more information about mu, etc. that I'm sure you remember already. If the medium is other than air, then epsilon becomes epsilon naught into the dielectric constant, and mu becomes mu naught into relative permeability of the medium. Okay, so all well known. A lot of these documents were written keeping mechanical engineers in mind. That's why you see a lot of elementary info here. Yeah, this is epsilon naught and mu naught here. Problem 1, close enough to real life. An overhead transmission line comprising two parallel aluminum conductors for which conductivity is given 3.816 multiplied by 10 raised to the power 7 Siemens per meter. Now these two parallel wires have diameter of 1.5 centimeter each, which is very close to real life. And they are separated by 1 meter, which is also very close to many real life situations. Frequency is 50 hertz, which is real life in this country at least. And the length is 100 kilometers, so it's a medium transmission line. Yeah, 100 kilometers, probably between two successive towns is the distance, mostly. So that's also close enough to real life. Now the question says, draw an approximate equivalent circuit of the line containing lumped components, assume air medium. This is what actually in industry you are supposed to be doing. If you are working for, say, Rajasthan Electricity Board or West Bengal Electricity Board or whatever, equivalent circuits are required. Calculations need to be done very carefully. So the answer is here, theoretically at least. This is what they are looking for, but they want numerical values. So first thing, calculate R, L, G, and C. Hopefully there is no mistake in my calculations. Let's see. Mu is mu naught because you have got air medium. Epsilon is epsilon naught because it's air medium, and epsilon double prime is 0 for air. So if epsilon double prime is 0, one thing is clear, that capital G will be 0. So one of the four parameters is already known. For, let's see which one I have done next. Yeah, I have done L after that. The formula for L, in the exam, assuming it's a physical exam here in the campus, I generally supply formula sheet. Most of the memorizing is gone, but still you need to use correct formulas. If it's an online exam, we'll see how to handle it. Anyway, the formula for L is this. Okay, so important thing is to figure out cos hyperbolic inverse of d by 2a first. Yeah, first thing G is 0 for sure. Okay, what is L? Let me go back. Yeah, this is the formula, mu naught. Wait a minute, let me go back. What was the formula for L? I'm making sure there's no mistake. Yeah, mu by pi. So 4 pi into 10 to the power minus 7 divided by pi. So 4 into 10 to the power minus 7. Yes. 4 into 10 to the power minus 7. Yes. Cos hyperbolic inverse d by 2a. D, capital D, is 1 meter. Yeah. And the radius, sorry, diameter is 1.5 centimeters. So yeah, what I have done is I have converted. Just 1 minute, I'm checking everything correctly. Yeah, correct. 1 meter is 100 centimeter. So 100 divided by 1.5 becomes 1000 divided by 15. I think I'm correct. Yes. So you have to use a calculator. And if you are not sure how to calculate cos hyperbolic inverse on a calculator, you can contact me after the class. Most likely inverse function is there. After that, you press cos hyperbolic inverse. That's it. That's the way to do it. But there are alternative techniques also to do it correctly. So cos hyperbolic inverse of 1000 divided by 15 works out to approximately 4.8928. Do these things very correctly. Okay. Now you plug in that value into the formula for L. You get 1.9571 microhenry per meter. This is very close to real life. Microhenry per meter type of values. Capacitance, the formula was pi epsilon prime, and then the same famous factor there. Pi epsilon prime divided by cos hyperbolic inverse d by 2a, which is already known as 4.8928. So much farad per meter. Do the calculation, you should be able to get this number, 5.6850 picofarad per meter. This is also close enough to real life. Capacitance is not very large. Loop resistance, this is going to be significant. This is the main culprit in losses. First thing you do is calculate RS. You could have done it in two different ways. One is using this formula directly, equation 5. Or you could first calculate delta S, and then from there you go to equation 8. I think I have used that omega mu formula directly. Omega is 2 pi f, mu is 4 pi into 10 to the power minus 7 divided by 2 sigma. Sigma is the electrical conductivity which is given for aluminum. Aluminum, by the way, is cheaper and lighter. So transmission lines, especially long ones, are invariably made of aluminum or some composite material. Copper will be too expensive. Yeah, so 3.816 into 10 to the power 7. That's what I have put here, right here, and square root. This is not the actual value of R. This is the surface resistance. Okay, you can do the calculation. Hopefully, you will get the same answer that I got. Delta S also has been calculated, although it is not necessary, I suppose, but I have still calculated. It is 1.1522 centimeter at this rate. Now, R is given by this formula. Yeah, RS upon pi A. That's the one I'm using here. RS upon pi A, yes. RS is 2.2744 into 10 to the power minus 6 divided by pi A. A is 0.75 centimeter. So 0.75 into 10 raised to the power minus 2 meter. R turns out to be almost 100 micro ohm per meter. And your line is supposed to be, I think, 100 kilometers long. Yeah, just a minute. Yeah, 100 kilometers long. Good. So once you have calculated these 4 values, in fact, one of them is 0 anyway, in this case. Now you do this multiplication. L delta X, I'm calling it X, it could have been delta Z also. The value of L that we have calculated is 1.9571 microhenry per meter. 1.9571 into 10 to the power minus 6 multiplied by length in meters. 100 kilometer into 10 to the power 3. So this works out to 0.19571 Henry approximately. Not very small. The reactance will be 2 pi FL. You can do the calculation. It works out to be 61.48 ohm approximately. R delta X, similarly, we have figured out R per unit length as 96.53 micro ohm. Multiply that by the length in meter, you get 9.653 ohm. It's quite high. C delta X, similarly, you get 0.5685 microfarad. And if you convert it into corresponding reactance by doing 1 upon 2 pi Fc, you get 5.6 kilo. Double check, Michael. So yeah, 5.6 kilo. And G is 0, so G delta X is also 0. Hence the equivalent circuit has this nature. Total resistance is R into delta X, which we have calculated as 9.653 ohm. Yeah. Total inductance has a reactance which is equal to 61.48 ohm. Yes. And total capacitance has a reactance in parallel, of course. Okay. I guess I have not shown the calculation for that, but you can double check that 1 upon 2 pi Fc. Oh yeah, it's right here, 5.6 kilo ohm. Remember, it's a capacitive reactance, so minus J will be there. This is the equivalent circuit. No parallel resistance because G is 0. Now, based on this, for a given Vs, Is at the sending end, you can calculate VR, IR on the receiving end by using KCL, KVL, Ohm's law, etc. That is the advantage of having equivalent circuit. Once you have figured it out, Vs versus VR and Is versus IR can be figured out using elementary circuit analysis in the complex domain. This is how transmission lines look. Overhead transmission lines typically look like this. Poles are there. In fact, they are complicated structures, not simple poles. Because of mechanical regions, they need to be designed very, very, very intelligently so that they survive almost all imaginable conditions. Even then, poles fall, all the time. Poles have to be insulated from transmission lines. So there are insulators in between, which give enough mechanical strength, but no electrical connectivity. Every day you hear about accidents involving transmission lines. Just 2 days ago, 7 people died near Jaipur. They were, I think, coming back from temple and suddenly this live wire fell on their vehicle. Very high voltage lines. So if poles don't do their job, the results are catastrophic. These are underground lines. These two guys are laying them down. Underground lines have their own advantages. First of all, cosmetically, they are looking good. And you don't have to worry about a lot of environmental factors that are applicable to overhead lines, like wind, snow, ice, dust, and mischievous people, who want to, be a nuisance. That's it. They want to steal copper or aluminum. Underground lines are not that easy to steal from, But there are pros and cons for underground and overhead lines. Nothing is perfectly going to fit any real life situation. It's a very intelligent call that we have to make, whether we want to lay overhead lines or underground lines or a mixture of the two. The formulas for RLGC would be applicable to underground lines also, but you have to be careful about interpreting mu and epsilon, especially epsilon, because underground means you have got earth, soil. Soil is non-magnetic most of the time, but its dielectric constant is lossy. That has to be factored in calculating RLGC, especially G and C. Three wire lines are also quite common, and there are formulas available to calculate RLGC for them. Just a sample calculation. You don't have to memorize formulas. They are all available. 2 wire and 3 wire lines are most common. Obviously, 3-phase systems will need 3 wires for sure, maybe 4 if there is a neutral that has to be run. Now, this is a very big document on transmission lines from the point of view of power systems. It is more for your reference. At least you should be aware of what is involved in designing and operating transmission lines for power systems. Resistance has quite significant dependence on frequency. We know that. I'm sure you all appreciate that. It also depends on temperature. In Kashmir, right now, it would have a very different temperature, the same aluminum wire, compared to the same thing, let's say, in Jodhpur. Or even in summertime, Jodhpur will be a lot more hot than Srinagar or, say, Leh in Ladakh. So temperature can play havoc with your calculations in transmission lines resistance. Also, how you are building transmission lines, whether you are using spirals of wires or you are bundling many conductors together, that also has serious effect on resistance value. So all that has to be accounted for. I give you very simplistic calculations on RLGC. Real life calculations require a lot more empirical or semi-empirical formulas or tables to come up with a realistic value of these parameters. Current carrying capacity is extremely important. The thicker the wire, the higher the current it can carry, right? So depending on how much current you expect the wires to handle, you'll select an appropriate diameter. Or you would like to be a little bit on the safer side, in fact. That capacity is known as ampacity. Fine. Inductance and inductive reactance. There's a lot of factors that affect this parameter. At least read the titles carefully. If the conductor is solid, formula will be slightly different. If the conductor is round versus it is non-round, formula may have to be corrected appropriately for inductance. For three-phase systems, if they are not balanced, the formula for inductance becomes phase specific. I'm not giving you a direction to read all the formulas. I want you to appreciate the bigger picture. Capacitance also has a lot of parameters that affect it. Earth has its own effect on capacitance. I was ignoring that in the calculations that I did just now. For three-phase systems, again, if it is not balanced, you may have to have three different capacitance values. Again, if the lines are bundled together, like several conductors bundled together in a single line, in a single conductor rather, or strand rate, etc., all that affects capacitance value. Okay. Of course, this definition is well known to you, so I don't have to stress on that again. But read it a little bit carefully. RLGC, they are dependent on a lot of practical things that cannot be built into the simple formulas that we were using in the solved numerical problem. Equivalent circuit of a transmission line. We have been through it, so I'm not going to waste your time. This is slightly different from what I was doing. Here they have broken the capacitance in parallel into two parts, one at the sending end and one at the receiving end. Maybe that's a better and more accurate circuit. Fine. We can do that also. Once we know C, you can have half of the C at the sending end and half at the receiving end to make it more realistic in terms of simulating. Okay, so I'm going to bypass all this. Formulas for resistance I have already given you. I think they have similar formulas in this document. Effect of frequency, temperature effect. Be aware that formulas are available to include these effects in the calculation. These are practically measured values of resistivity of several materials, several conducting materials that are used for building transmission lines. Of course, silver is hardly used for power systems. It will be too expensive. Annealed copper, depending on situation, maybe it can be used in some cases. Hard drawn copper is very strong mechanically, and aluminum is the most common material for transmission lines. That's for sure. It has slightly higher resistivity, but it is a lot cheaper and lighter also in weight. These are two different examples of how the cross section of the conductor looks. Several wires bundled together, you see. That's how we do things. So that current carrying capacity goes up. You have a lot of wires in parallel. So total current carrying capacity of the conductor goes up significantly. Again, formulas are there, appropriately modified to take care of these effects. How the bundling effect affects the resistance. There are formulas for that. There are 2-wire lines, 3-wire lines, 4-wire lines. These are the 3 possible configurations which are commonly encountered. For delta system, 3-wire line will be fine. For Y system, 4 wires will be required, and for single phase, 2 wires are fine. Okay, and based on which configuration you are looking at, formulas for RLGC may be different. Current carrying capacity, there are formulas for it, and practically measured values are also available in tabular form. By the way, the authors of this document are mechanical engineers, but still they have put enough information about the electrical engineering aspects. Okay, we know this formula. I think I've already given you. I'm not going to waste your time. Let's move forward. See what else is there in this document. Inductance formulas, mutual inductance as well as self-inductance. Both are being accounted for in these formulas. Yeah, this I have already given you, but the derivation is here in case you are interested. 3-phase line, I told you different formulas will apply for a 3-phase line. So they are all derived here. Okay, no need to memorize anything. Be aware that this info is around. One very important factor is that despite your best effort, the cross section of the wire is never perfectly a circle. It is irregular. And with aging, it becomes even more irregular. So rather than saying diameter, industry uses geometric mean diameter, GMD, which is the effective diameter, because the cross section does not have a perfectly circular shape. The actual diameter is slightly different from the physical diameter. So GMD values are actually specified by the vendor when you buy conductors from them. And these are calculated or derived experimentally. It all depends, how vendors are justifying their data. And other thing is, the wires, the transmission lines, for some practical regions, we keep changing their positions over distance. I think there's a word for it. I've forgotten that word. There's a particular word for this technique. It will be there somewhere in the document. Yeah, transposition. It's called transposed system. I don't know why they do it. There must be a reason for it. But this is called a transposed line. So inductance, capacitance, formulas, etc. may have to be different depending on which line is A, which line is B, which line is C, in which segment of the transmission line. Okay, so GMD means geometric mean diameter. Again, a lot of formulas for capacitance. Let's move forward. Three-phase line formulas are there. I would like to move forward to something even more interesting. Capacitance. Yeah, Earth has its own effect. So there are formulas available to model that. A lot of electromagnetism is there behind all this, There is a certain minimum distance that transmission lines always maintain from Earth for obvious reasons. One is the capacitance effect will be lower. Other, of course, is even more practical, that no human being will be able to touch them. Lot of aluminum cables are available in market, and there's a lot of practical data about each one given in this table. Diameter is there, of course. Yeah. Resistance value, current carrying capacity, etc., etc., etc. R value is also given for most of them at 60 hertz at various temperatures also. These tables are commonly used by power system engineers when they design things. Okay, just for your information, for your reference, don't worry about memorizing anything. More tables on conductors. These are all industry standards. And they are given industry names also. The codes are there. I don't know how they came up with these names. There must be some reason. Table goes on. Anyway, let's move for more tables, more conductors, more tables. You can go through these if you are interested later. Let me go through these tables. Yeah. Now what? Overhead conductors, besides electrical part, there's a lot of mechanical challenges associated also with them. Oh, by the way, these are the references this chapter has been taken from. Yeah. Okay. Bala is there. Yes. Some is also there. Yeah. Some of the well-known names are there. Grover is also there. Okay. The last chapter of this presentation talks about mechanical issues with transmission. One very important issue is the tension. If tension is too much, mechanical tension, the wires will start either breaking soon or degrading soon in performance. Mechanical engineer's job is to worry about all this, but you should at least appreciate what they are fighting for. Sag, the wires are never straight between two poles. They sag because of gravity. You don't want sag to be too much because then it is dangerous for sure, and other effects would also be there. R, L, G, C might also change, especially C would change for sure. Even L might change if sagging is too much between two poles. So that's why poles are not too far away from each other, because you want to maintain sag within acceptable values and tension also within acceptable values. Span, distance between two poles. How much length typically is the maximum that you go for? Slack, that is related to sag. Effect of ice and wind, because ice especially, it starts accumulating around the conductors. I'm a Canadian, I know this firsthand. I've lived with snow and ice for 20 years in my life, up to minus 45 degrees Celsius. is what I faced. And I've seen these things, breaking transmission lines within seconds. Ice formation around transmission lines can be very dangerous. Sand fortunately does not deposit around conductors. So, and wind also does not do that much damage. Wind and sand have their own problems when it comes to conductors, but ice is probably the most dangerous one. In areas like Kashmir or Himachal Pradesh or Ladakh, these are issues even for people in this country. Kashmir Electricity Board engineers have special issues to deal with compared to, let's say, Rajasthan Electricity Board engineers. Of course, we learn from each other all the time. Okay, so let's see. There's a lot of calculations, and simulation tools are also around to do these calculations for you. Installation is also another issue that requires a lot of money, a lot of effort. If it is not done right, the poles will snap, when they are not supposed to. Anyway, I'll not bore you too much with this, but be aware that there's a lot of mechanical engineering related info available for transmission lines. Formulas also for predicting the span that you would be comfortable with. The sag is modeled as a parabola generally to do the calculations, which is close enough to reality. Conductor length depends on sag also, so formulas are there for that. Let me not go too deep into all this. Slack is defined slightly differently compared to sag, but you can look up the definition if you want. Again, parabolic descriptions. If one pole is long, one pole is longer and the other one is shorter, the parabolic equations will be different, obviously. You can see that. So they have done that analysis also for you. Ice and wind calculations, how do they affect the performance? A lot of practical info is there, and I think there are formulas also around to predict the behavior of ice versus transmission lines. Even electrical properties will be changed a lot because of deposition of ice on the conductors. Wind has its own problems. The lines start swaying back and forth. And if you have not designed them correctly, they might break. And even temporarily, their performance might change when they are swaying back and forth. Even RLGC values might change. R may not change, but L and C will definitely change. All that has to be kept in mind. There's a upper tension is force essentially that is trying to break the conductor. So there are upper limits based on the material that you got to be aware of. Okay, a lot of formulas to calculate the sag predicted. With the ice, the sag will be more, obviously, because of the gravity. But even under conditions without ice, sag is there. You don't want the sag to be so much that people on ground may start touching the conductor. The safety has to be kept in mind. Even in the worst case, the sag should be small enough so that the wires never come close to any human being on earth or anything on earth. Even cattle die, Even inert like buildings, inert objects like buildings, trees, they also can get seriously affected by transmission lines if they touch transmission lines. And these are very high voltage lines, 33 kilovolt, 110 volt, etc., etc. Okay, so this is almost the end of the chapter, I think. Okay. Something for you to keep with you. You do not need all this at this point in time. Tables are there for calculating sag versus tension. Okay, we are almost done. Yeah, this is all mechanical engineering world about transmission lines. Suspension structures, etc., etc. Okay. Calculations, measurements in real life. Lot of methods are given for calculating sag or measuring sag, etc. Anyway, I think we are done. Oh yeah, the last thing before I close this document. Lot of defining terms are there related to transmission lines. Don't worry about reading each one, but whenever time permits, at least see what funny names are given in some cases. Bull wheel and whatnot. Try to read the definition. References are given here. Fine. Okay, so we are almost done with this. Oh yeah, okay, one more thing. Problem 1, if you recall, let me go back. We were calculating RLGC for an overhead case. Actually, let me not go back because it will take too much time. Problem 2 essentially is at the end of the document, and it tells you to repeat problem 1, assuming an underground line. Assume that Earth's dielectric constant is 51.5 and the loss tangent is 0.2. So same formulas that we use in problem 1 will be necessary here also, but they need to be properly interpreted. For underground lines, some results will be different. It's a 100-kilometer long line, I think, and 50 hertz signal for sure. That much we knew. We also know D and A. They are all repeated here again. First of all, I think inductance formula will not change because Earth has no magnetic effect, not under normal conditions. So mu can still be taken as mu naught. So L value will not change, even for underground line. Capacitance will definitely change. Instead of epsilon naught, you will be using epsilon naught, epsilon r. So whatever value you got in problem 1 will now be multiplied by 51.5. Check it for yourself. So the result now will be 292.78 picofarad per meter. It is much higher than what we saw for overhead lines. Resistance will not change. It is purely depending on the conductivity of aluminum. So that number would remain unchanged. Leakage conductance will not be 0 anymore. For overhead case, it was 0. But now Earth has a complex dielectric constant or complex permittivity. So epsilon double prime will not be 0. Tan delta is 0.2. Epsilon double prime is 0.2 times epsilon prime. So you can do the calculation 0.2 epsilon naught epsilon r. Check my calculations. I think G turns out to be this whole thing multiplied by 51.5. The final result turns out to be 357.2 into 51.5 pico-mho per meter. Once you have got these 4 values, you do the same thing. L delta x and corresponding XL value, then R delta x, C delta x and corresponding XC value, and then G delta x will not be 0 anymore. So you take that value and do 1 upon of that to calculate the parallel resistance. So now the equivalent circuit for the underground line has all the 4 parameters: resistance, inductance, and capacitance, and leakage resistance, which is in parallel. Check my calculations once you get the document. Okay. When we are going to 3-phase systems, transmission lines will be appearing again and again. So I thought it's a good idea to get an idea about them first and before we go back to the subject of 3-phase. systems. Oh, what a document. Let me just go back quickly. See. Yeah, we have done all this. Yeah, I think we're done. Now, before I jump into analysis of YY system, and I want to show you something else as well. I've been telling you that the three-phase system can be delta type or star type on both generator and load side. On top of it, we also know that on the generator side, there's a progressive 120-degree phase shift among the generators. That can be plus 120 or minus 120 degree. And that, depending on whether it is plus 120 or minus 120, you define sequence, positive sequence or negative sequence. That is what is given in this document. It's good to keep this document with you. I'll send it to you today. The order in which the three-phase voltages attain their positive peak values is known as the phase sequence. This essentially depends on whether the phase difference is minus 120 minus 240 or plus 120 plus 240. Conventionally, the three phases are designated as red, R, yellow, Y, or blue, B. I call them ABC, and many books do that. We can call them ABC also, no issue with that. Black will be reserved for neutral. And when we say ABC, then N, capital N or small n, will be reserved for neutral. The symbols are usable both ways. RYB, B, one B is blue, other B is black, or ABCN. Both symbols are commonly used by books. The phase sequence is said to be RYB, that means ABC. Let's say R is A, Y is B, and B is C. Then the phase sequence will be RYB or ABC if R attains its peak or maximum value first with respect to the reference as shown in the counterclockwise direction. Okay, forget this. You simply remember that if Y voltage is minus 120 degree phase shift compared to R, then and B has another minus 120 degree phase shift with Y, then you have a positive phase sequence. Simple. Forget the rest of the things. Okay. So this small document will be helpful once I send it. Now let me see this one. Yeah, this I think we have already seen, so I will not bother you with this. Now, in the remaining time we have today, let's see how to come up with reasonably accurate analysis of a star-star system to begin with. In general, it is not possible to do the analysis in a simple manner because each load is different from the other load, each generator is somewhat different from the other ones, etc., etc. To simplify the analysis, what we do is we assume balanced conditions. That way, mathematics becomes a lot more easy to handle. And our conceptual understanding, at least, can be worked on. For unbalanced systems also, this analysis can be generalized. And I'll try to give you one or two examples later. But today, I'll assume that everything is balanced. That means all the three branches of the load, star load of course, have identical impedance. And it may be complex. Yes, that's okay. Generators are all balanced. That means they are generating equal amount of voltage. The only difference, and same frequency also. The only difference is they have progressive 120 degree phase shift. That's it. And we will ignore the losses in the generators. We will also ignore losses in the transmission lines. That means we will assume RLGC all to be zero. Star-star system. 3 generators on the left hand side and 3 loads on the right hand side. top generator on the left hand side, of course, has, I'm drawing voltages and currents in the phasor domain. Okay. So the voltage value is VAN. That means phase A generator has voltage measured with respect to the neutral wire. That's why the symbol VAN. The current coming out of this phase A, will be called capital I with a small a. And the wire coming out will be given the notation small a. Towards the load side, after transmission line, after we go through the transmission line, what we receive is what will be called capital A. That node will be given the name capital A. For a lossless line, small a and capital A will have the same potential. So I'm being slightly idealistic here by assuming lossless line. In reality, this is never true. Small a node will have a different voltage than capital A node. But let's ignore that for now. Current going into the load in the branch A of load will be called I capital A. Although in this case, I small a and I capital A will be the same because of the way connections are made. But still, I'll maintain the difference in the symbols. The impedance of the phase A in load on the load side will be given called ZA. And of course, all the impedances are equal, so each one is also equal to something called ZPH, phase impedance. The second generator on the left hand side again has the notation VBN. Obvious reason is that this is phase B and the voltage is again measured with respect to neutral. So it is called VB. The current coming out from the generator side is called I with a small b, and that entering the load side will be called I with a capital B. And then the third one also, VCN. The node coming out will be called small c, and the node entering the load will be called capital C. The currents also, although they are equal, but they will be given different notations. I small c on the generator side, I capital C on the load side. This is not my invention. Most books follow this symbol mechanism to distinguish one kind of current from the another kind. Load side versus generator side calculations have to be done differently. So you have to use different notations. And if transmission lines losses are not negligible, then obviously this classification becomes even more critical. The neutral wire also on the generator side will begin with a node called small n. And on the load side, I should have called it capital N. Yeah, I'm calling it capital N. Good. Okay. And there is a neutral wire running also. Currents going from generator to load are all going towards the right, and everything is returned through neutral to the generator. So that's why I've shown the current, the neutral current, whether I small n or I capital N, as going backwards. Neutral path provides the return circuit for all the phase currents to come back to the generator. Neutral is generally run along with the main transmission lines. And on top of it, there is a ground wire, I told you already, which is local everywhere for diagnostic purposes. Okay. Now what do we do? I'm going to assume positive phase sequence. That means VAN will be some peak value VM with a phase shift of 0 degrees. VBN with a peak value of VM with phase shift of minus 120 degrees, because positive phase sequence means minus 120 degrees. And VCN with a phase shift of minus 240 degrees. As I told you last time, that some books, they use RMS values instead of VM value. Fine. We can do that also, but I'm sticking to peak values right now in defining VAN, VBN, and VCN. Now keep in mind that minus 240 degree is also equivalent to plus 120 degrees. If you add plus 360 degrees to it, you get plus 120. So another way of writing VCN is VM with a phase shift of plus 120 degrees. A lot of books actually do that without explaining why. It is actually minus 240 degrees, but we have added plus 360 degrees, which is permissible, you know. So a lot of books actually represent VCN by VM with plus 120 degrees and VBN as VM with minus 120 degrees. And VAN, of course, is the reference voltage. So it will be assumed to have zero phase shift. Now, one thing which is going to be very important is these values. Something has gone wrong here. It's not done properly. Important thing is that you should be able to calculate cosine and sine values of plus 120 degrees and minus 120 degrees and plus 240 degrees and minus 240 degrees. It is doable on the calculator. I've given some values here, but you should be able to do it by yourself. Now, these are supposed to be the phase voltages, VAN, VBN, and VCN. Line voltages are defined as VAB, VBC, and VCA on the generator side as well as on the load side. Only thing is, on the load side, I'll call them V capital A, capital B, V capital B, capital C, and V capital C, capital A. While on the generator side, I'll call them V small a, small b, V small b, small c, and V small c, small a. That's why this distinction between small letters and capital letters is important. On the load side, we generally use capital letters. On the generator side, we generally use small letters. It's a convention. That's it. Okay. So VAB, how do you calculate VAB in the system? Because public will see that. Public will not see VAN or VBN or VCN. They'll see VAB, VBC, and VC. Transmission lines will actually see that. Okay. VAB, if you look at the loop between A and B carefully, VAB is actually VAN minus VBN, assuming polarities to be as shown. VAN minus VBN is supposed to be VAB. Let's see. Yep, it's not mentioned here. But anyway, we'll come to that. First, okay, some detail is missing here, but I think you should be able to do it by yourself. Yeah, something is missed here. VAB is VAN minus VBN. So you take VAN from equation 1, take VBN from equation 2. Subtract VBN from VAN in complex domain and convert e to the power minus j 120 degrees as cos 120 degrees minus j sin 120 degrees. That's what I have done without actually mentioning the formula that I'm using. That is what I've done. Okay. Try to verify this. Cos of 120 degrees is, you can check it yourself on the calculator as well. Is minus 1 by 2. Okay. So in VBN, you will use that when you are expanding e to the power minus j 120 degrees. And sine 120 degrees, I think, is square root of 3 divided by 2. So plugging in all those values, what I get is VAB in terms of VM as this formula. This is elementary circuit analysis, but one has to do it very carefully. Okay. Try to verify this yourself. The result that you finally get for VAB is square root of 3 into VM into e to the power j 30 degrees. That means the line voltage VAB has 30-degree phase shift with respect to the phase voltage VAN. And of course, the magnitude of line voltage has also gone up by a factor of square root of 3 compared to the magnitude of the phase voltage. It's a very significant finding. Okay. And then similarly, you try VBC. Here actually I have written the formula also, VBN minus VCN. This I'm sure you can see from the loop between B and C. So VBN minus VCN, again, here I've spelled out exactly what I've done. VBN is e to the VM into e to the power minus j 120 degrees, and VCN is VM e to the power plus j 120 degrees, right? Minus j 240 degrees, which becomes plus j 120 degrees. So I subtract these two. If I take VM out and simplify, I get a sine function, because e to the power j theta minus e to the power minus j theta is related to sine of theta. That is what I have used here. VBC turns out to also have the same magnitude that VAB has, square root of 3 multiplied by VM. But phase angle here is minus 90 degrees. So it is 120 degree less than the phase angle of VAB. It's all ideal conditions right now. In reality, it's not that correct, but under ideal conditions, you'll see perfectly 120 degree phase shift between line voltages also. And you'll see exactly the same magnitude in all the line voltages on the generator side at least. How about VCA? Again, simplifying this result leads me to same magnitude that I got for VAB and VBC, but with a phase shift of minus 210 degrees. That means another 120 degree phase shift compared to VBC. So line voltages also have 120 degree phase shift progressively, but everything is shifted by 30 degrees compared to phase voltages. And the magnitudes go up by a factor of square root of 3. This is the crux of the analysis. Now, since all the magnitudes of line voltages are equal, we define that magnitude as the line voltage or line to line voltage. Magnitude of VAB or VBC or VCA is known as VLL. It's scalar quantity. So the value is square root of 3 multiplied by VM. In RMS value, obviously, it will become square root of 3 divided by square root of 2 VM. And we define the RMS value of the phase voltage as VM divided by square root of 2. So line voltage in RMS value also is square root of 3 multiplied by the phase voltage in RMS value. Magnitudes. Phase is anyway shifted by 30 degrees throughout. This is star-star system. For delta-delta system, it will be not necessarily the same. Okay, then. Now line currents. Fortunately, they are simple to figure out. Line currents are same as phase currents because of the way connections are made. I small a and I capital A are both the same. whatever is coming out of the generator is going as the line current in all the three cases. Right here. For delta system, it will not be that way. Again, I'm giving you that word of caution. Now, the analysis is normally done by taking one phase at a time, because there is a 120-degree phase shift anyway. If you can analyze one phase carefully, other two can be also analyzed in a similar manner by introducing 120-degree phase shift. That's it. So for a single phase equivalent circuit of this system, what we do is we draw, let's say, equivalent circuit for phase A. We'll have a single generator with VAN and a single load ZPH, which was the, assuming balance loads, it was the value of the impedance in the phase A of the load. Okay. So single phase equivalent circuit is quite simple in such a case. One generator and one load. The transmission line losses are 0. Otherwise, we would have had to put a complex lossy impedance between the generator and the load to account for the losses of the transmission. So the current, whether I small a or I capital A, will be simply VAN divided by ZA or ZPH. And for other phases also, you can draw similar equivalent circuits. Only thing is, for phase B, you will use VBN, and for phase C, you will use VCN. So the phase shift will become minus 120 degree and minus 240 degree accordingly. So the line currents IB and IC can be similarly written by these formulas. The only difference is phase shift, because loads are balanced anyway. Same load impedance is there in all the branches of the load. So ZPH will appear in all the three equations. If it is unbalanced load, then ZPH will be different for each of the phases. Okay, you have to account for that. Okay. Now, one thing that I've been telling you in the past about three-phase systems is that the instantaneous power has no time dependence. I'll have to prove that to you in the next lecture based on this analysis that I've done today. And on top of it, in a balanced system, it has been shown that current carried by the neutral is 0. That also I'm going to show you next time based on this analysis that we have done today. These two are very important findings for a balanced YY system. So we'll do that next time. And then I will probably show you some numerical examples how to calculate complex power in each generator, as well as in each of the branches of the load and so on. And power balance has to be maintained. So, okay. So the rest of the document will be taken up